When music writer and editor Jillian Garr isn't reviewing a band at a Seattle club or writing an article for the local music newspaper, you can find her at the library conducting research for one of her many writing projects. Garr views research as one of the most essential parts of her work.
Research is really the backbone of my writing because it gives me access to information that I wouldn't have otherwise, and you probably wouldn't put in everything you learned about your subject in the one article or even a book, but it gives you an overall familiarity with the subject. And if you have that familiarity, you'll be more comfortable writing about it, and that will color the quality of the writing.
The greatest challenge to Garr is knowing when to stop her research and begin writing.
You could just get on a roll and know that you're uncovering more and more and more, and if you just had a little more time, just one more week, and then the next week you feel exactly the same. It's setting a stopping point where you know you have to stop, and no matter how interesting it is, you have to turn to the writing.
The first place Garr visits to begin research on a new project is the library. Finding books there is now easier since the library transferred card catalogs to a computer system.
You could look it up by title, by subject, by author. Maybe you want subject. And then you type in what your subject is, and they give you a list of all the books that they have. And most of the books on a particular subject will be in one area. So you go there, look at the books, look in the index and the table of contents to see if they cover the things that you're interested in.
In researching her book, She's a Rebel, The History of Women in Rock and Roll, Garr also searched through used record and bookstores for information on recording artists of the 50s and 60s.
Well, liner notes, which would be notes that were commissioned specifically for that particular album, can be very useful, particularly if it's an older artist. And when I was doing my book, that was a very useful way to get information about groups I really couldn't find any other information on. Used bookstores are also like a hidden treasure trove to get information. Maybe in some of the materials I'd read already, I'd see references to another book. So you'd have to go to used bookstores to look for stuff that was out of print. I know you've been a musician for a long time, and I was wondering how you got interested in music and just...
In addition to books and records, Garr finds that people are a great source of information, especially for gathering first-person accounts from a certain era.
Talking to a person, obviously you get their story, and you get it in their own words. Of course, it will just be their version, and that's, you know, very subjective from that viewpoint. But if you're talking about a musician who toured in the 50s, they can tell you what it was like. And depending on who your subject is, you know, they can give you a lot of little interesting stories that you're probably not going to read in a book.
To complement her interviews and library research, Garr has recently tapped into yet another resource for gathering information.
A new resource I've discovered is going online, or using the information superhighway, as it's called, just using a modem to tap into a computer network. For instance, on the internet, some people that have an interest in a particular subject will set up what's called a news group, and that will collect information on that particular subject.
After she's researched her subject, the process of organizing and writing begins.
You've pulled together all your research, and now you have to try and distill it and see what's useful to you and what's not. So by that stage, I've probably read everything, and there you get a good idea for themes that emerge or particular points that a lot of people stress. So when it comes to the writing, I'd have started with an outline, just sort of a rough sketch where I wanted to go.
After deciding on chapter headings, Garr begins to link her information together.
It's just like breaking it down to sort of the smallest area, and then writing that, and then, you know, gradually joining up all these bits so they coalesce into an entire chapter. So then you have to kind of think of it as linking it to that next chapter, and so on. And then you're done.
When Garr finishes her first draft, she spends as much time as she can revising.
What I like to do is maybe, you know, do a complete version, finish it to where I like it, and if you have time, maybe leave it alone for a day or two and come back. But you might not have that time, so you might be more pressed for time. Other times, you might just get on a roll and you'll be just so caught up you can't really think about doing anything else, and so you just keep going back to it and keep going back to it and keep going back to it. Actually, I enjoy revision because that means you've got something there to revise, so the hard work is done. It's pretty much finished. You just want to fine-tune it or revise it or cut it. That's actually pretty easy, and that's fun. That's relaxing. Maybe it's a bit time-consuming if you're moving stuff around, but there's not that much writing involved anymore, and you're just shaping it, and that's fun. As far as knowing when you're finished, a lot of times I'll just get a feel. I'll think, well, I covered that subject and said what I wanted to say about that subject. I would choose a topic that I was already interested in. So you would presumably have more enjoyment learning about it. And plus, you know, it's kind of like an excuse to, you know, indulge in your obsession. The audience for whom you're writing, that's the key to how detailed you might have to get. If I wrote an article about, you know, a group like the Beatles and it's for a collector's magazine, I could assume that most people reading it are probably pretty familiar with the history of the Beatles. So, you know, I don't have to like get a specific. Whereas for another article you might say, in the album Revolver, which came out in 1966, and you have to get a little more detailed, say, I was writing it for a daily newspaper, where there will be Beatle fans reading the newspaper, but there's also going to be a lot of people that aren't that familiar with the subject. I don't know that it's possible to revise too much. Just if you think it needs a little more work, maybe it does.